this session coming hot on the heels of a lot of trending news this week, where you've seen the ODPC, Office of the Data Protection Office, actually raising their can to whip a few of the offenders. Yeah. So did you participate in that viral conversations? There have been in various platforms, people giving their opinions. Yeah, so the conversations have been trending on various platforms with the people giving various opinions on the outcomes of that. So the theme of this conference is about smart governments. So we are trying to align that data privacy to that theme. And so the format of this session will be, I'll give a short presentation about the area of data privacy in smart governments, and then I'll be joined by a panel who will also give their thought leadership views on the same subjects, and then we'll wind down by having a small Q&A, opening the floor for conversations and questions coming from the floor. So without further ado, just wanted to start with my presentation, and I'll start by introducing myself. I'm the CEO and founder of Predictive Analytics Lab. Basically, what we do as a Predictive Analytics Lab is we help organizations bridge that chasm of data literacy. So you're able to do that in three various ways. So literacy skills, you're able to build your skills through training. We develop softwares in artificial intelligence, machine learning, blockchain, and other new technologies such as ChatGPT that help you to return what we call return on investment on your investments. And then also we do data strategy that ensures that you're able to align to emerging trends, including the regulatory landscape that's evolving. That regulatory landscape is one such as what we're going to discuss today, the issue of data privacy and how that affects how you run your operations. So I don't know why the slides are not showing on the screen. I'll expect to have the slides on the screen. Is it just me who's seeing them? So you just give them a minute to sort that out. It's okay. It's okay now? Okay. So,
as we wait for the slides to come on, Tim, what did you think of the trending that you just talked about now?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so I think it's come right of age when we stop having these conversations at the comfort of our boardrooms and strategy meetings and seminars and conferences. So it's actually going mainstream, where we find now the ordinary mwananchi or citizen getting affected by what the intentions of the law were. So I think that helps in creating more advocacy and evangelism on the data privacy. And that kind of discomfort brings in that consciousness that for many years we've been trying to encourage users of data and producers of data to be conscious about. Yeah, so I believe even though we might go into a silence after this, but somewhere in the back of your mind other questions are going to evolve. And also from a regulator perspective, there are also other gray areas that I think need to be refined further to avoid those ambiguities in interpretation of the law. So I think it's a good move that is actually happening at a time when those instruments of change are still open to ensure that we have a law that can address the real issues without having to be partisan or appearing to bias to favor certain citizens over the others.
Okay, looks like we're ready for you.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, so I was just explaining about predictive analytics so that you may be able to familiarize yourself with what we do as an organization and being key partners of CIO in various events that they organize. And then I'll narrow down to the presentation, which will be about smart governments, explaining to you what smart government is, some of the tools that as an organization we developed for smart governments. A few of the county governments have benefited from our work, and then narrowing into the key aspects of the regulation that are found as pain points in the adoption of the smart government interventions, and then some recommendations on just what needs to be done. So perhaps you're sitting there wanting to know how do I get started in this? Yeah. So basically, talked about training, softwares, and also strategy, all around machine learning, artificial intelligence. That's what we are all about. This presentation I've mentioned is going to be about smart governments, technologies driving the smart government, what's the impact of data privacy and concerns, what are the challenges and opportunities of data privacy concerns, and then what are some of those strategies you might consider in adapting your data protection to drive the smart governments. So if you feel like something you intended to benefit from that's not mentioned in that summary, you could note it down and ask it as a Q&A at the end of these sessions, and then with my fellow knowledgeable panelists here, we can be able to unpack it further for you. Yeah. So the various technologies that are driving this, what you call smart government, and all these are anchored around what you call the Industry 4.0, the Industry 4.0 being the key revolution that's bringing about these changes that are not just unique to governments, but cut across various industries. So of course, government comes in critical as it's the carrier of policy, shaping policy, driving change, and instituting measures to implement some of the policy directions that the governments take, and that brings on board an aspect of innovation within the government, which has to, follow a certain a DNA that's within the acceptable movement that the revolution is going. So if you just look at these kind of technologies, various of them, I've seen a few solution providers at the exhibition areas, sharing some of them. We have cloud computing, we have IoT platforms, we have location detection technologies, authentication in fraud detection, 3D printing, smart sensors, big data analytics, and advanced algorithms. So all those are the various technologies that are driving adoption of smart technologies, and when you add government to it, by extension, into smart government. So all the government services, adding a layer of these technologies to the provision of the government services makes it become smart. Yeah, so having understood that, it will be important now to look at some of the solutions that you experience either as owners of those platforms or as consumers of the government services. Yeah, so you've got licensing, for example, Biashara platforms, you've got Kodi platforms, you've got Soko, promotions, parking automation, environment, land rates, and everything. So all those are the kind of solutions that can be embedded on the smart architecture to enable efficiency, speedy delivery, and then also enablement of innovation because of the digitization of the information that's running there. So this is just a snapshot of the solutions, but they cut across all the various interventions that the government can be able to give. We also have the area of a smart city. So smart cities will entail how do you create an ecosystem that can be able to simulate the collection of data, development of predictions of various outputs in the different, for example, public safety. We are looking at intelligent shopping, electric vehicle charging, smart energy, water quality, smart homes, yeah, and then also education. How does it benefit from the Internet of Things? Yeah, so this is just an ecosystem that shows how a smart city looks. There are different scalable areas that you can use to implement this, from a low-level maturity to a more mature smart city. We've got model cities developed across the world, Singapore being one, you've got London being the other, you've got Dubai coming up with a city for the future. You've got Saudi Arabia with the city, the line, which is going to be the longest city in the world with one singular line. All those being case studies that you can be able to borrow from. However, in our context here, we're looking at interventions being done in terms of how do you automate the parking solutions. Yeah, so as a county government and you're collecting data around the availability of parking slots so that you can be able to optimize the revenue collection from those parking lots. So how do you ensure that you have got the data that shows on this particular street you've got X amount of parking slots? What is the behavior around those parking slots? How many people, cars drive in any given hour? And then how do you optimize that to project the revenue that you can make in any given day? We've got solutions such as the fleet management solutions, which enable you to predict demand and supply. The price of fuel is escalated, so how do you use, for example, fuel sensors and GPS routing systems to be able to optimize the fleets that you have? And that brings in better governance in terms of use of resources. So because of for example, the price of fuel has almost gone up by 30% since the budget allocation was done. So how do you come up with these elements of smart city solutions to improve on your operations? Yeah. Also in the area of habitation, yeah, so resource allocation, what's the ratio of schools to the human population? What's the ratio of police stations to human? So are you using location intelligence, distribution of shopping outlets? Are you able to distribute the licensing of certain categories of businesses, for example, away from residential areas? Yeah, so you've had the hula baloo that comes with the residential based clubs who are now creating noise for the residents. So how do you create such a where you're consciously aware that this is demarcated as a residential area, you're not allowed to have a club licensed around there? Yeah, so that's kind of elements of smart city. Yeah, and some of those features of those can be used now to build a big ecosystem where someone wants to apply for a license. When they go there, they take a photo of the place where they want to apply a license for, they upload it on a system, and it blocks. If it's not a license, unless any way it can they're allowed to be licensed, it can block them. Yeah. Even just controlling competition. Yeah. So you find areas where there's like beer belts, you find areas where there are a lot of garages, a lot of salons. How do you prevent cannibalization and unfair competition amongst traders? Yeah, so those are some of the elements of what a smart city will entail. And in it, there are areas of data privacy. So how do you ensure that you're going to protect the privacy of the business people who are using that ecosystem? How do you ensure that there are different layers? There's always concerns around the different government agencies, such as the tax collector, KRA, accessing data from other government ecosystems. So how is that assurance given to the users or the owners of that data? So those are some of the elements you're going to see and challenges of that. Yeah. So now in a more advanced a smart city, you'll find that there are different drivers of that. So they're driven by sensors, networks, and engagement. Yeah, so sensors will be small chips which are embedded and installed in various ecosystems of communication. And actually, mobile phones are parts of those sensors. You may want to know what's the traffic situation in one particular area. There's CCTV camera there that streams video footage. That video footage can be analyzed to know how much traffic is there at any given time. Then you're able to optimize the road planning network to be able to address the issues of traffic. You've got networks, so those are the telecom networks. You've got networks that come in from community networks, such as the bus transport system network, taxi, Uber network. All those are the networks which generate a lot of data that can be used for planning. So, for example, Uber has outsourced the Uber data network information, where you can plug in, download information, and then you can use that for planning purposes. Google has outsourced the network information for traffic. You can be able to plug in and look at the instances of data periodically, every hour of the day, and that can be used also for planning. And then the last bit in real-time urban informatics is engagement. So how do you use this for engaging the stakeholders? For example, the citizen going into an area, and this also applies to the government stakeholders. So you're able to engage and see the planning, the policy, and rules are able to change to fit in the behavior that's being displayed. So we are not just restricted to urban areas. So this is in agriculture, yeah. So smart government's mandate is in healthcare, it's in agriculture, it's in transport, it's energy, it's quite wide, but I just selected those three, agriculture being the third one, just to showcase in areas of interest for agriculture is to relay, collect information, automate, relay, and plan ahead. Yeah. So we've got organizations that are both private sector and public sector. You've heard about initiatives here on the podium about some county governments collecting data from farmers. We have the Ministry of Agriculture in the funding coming in from donor organizations collecting data about the farmers, a database of about over 2 million farmers, data already collected. Yeah, we have private institutions such as agricultural seed companies. We have Monsanto, which collects data from sensors and distribute that to farmers through other initiatives they have in partnerships with the. And then we also have machinery. Yeah, so like the John Deere tractor has got sensors in it that collects information about the pH of the soil. We've got Scania trucks that collect information from the wipers of their windscreens about the rainfall information. So all that information could be collected, assimilated, and can be able to build a smart agricultural network. On one side, you have the prediction of weather, land preparation, and then on the other side, you have the market side. So on the market side, we have both exports and local consumption. There are platforms which are available that shows the trends in consumption. So recently, we experienced a shortage of onions. Yeah, so I think that was something which could be avoided by just looking at how many, we're importing a lot of onions from Tanzania, so we'll basically have looked at the trends of the Tanzanian side and see the production of onion is on lower side, and an onion is something that grows within 3 months, so we'll have invested in having farmers plant a few acreages of onion to fit that gap that was coming. Yeah, so then the other areas actually that could come in terms of seeing this smart agriculture ecosystem flourish. So for those of you who have got that mandate within your government departments of ensuring smart automation and smart data, you can look at some of these interventions. This is the technical architecture of a cloud system. Then there's a greenhouse somewhere collecting data. There's a farm and field. There's a crop sensors. So all these use cases vary according to crop, and also livestock and other areas of agriculture. So now down to the GDPR, now that you've understood the elements of a smart government. So where does GDPR, where does the data privacy sit in? So short snippet about the Kenya Data Act. It was largely adopted from the GDPR, which is a European standard of the general data protection. And elements of it have been enhanced and fine-tuned to address local nuances of our local behavior and local encounters. So for example, the example mostly given is when you go to a building and you're asked to write your name and leave your ID there, what happens to that book after you leave that building? Yeah. When you go to an M-Pesa agent and then someone is behind you and they're seeing the number you've written and the details you've written, how do you ensure that that person doesn't take your details and use them somewhere else? Yeah. So the area of smart agriculture, smart government, we have got various key guidelines that you need to pick out that will encourage fear of adoption of that. So a lot of people, when they hear about digitization, they start fearing. Okay, now KRA is coming to see my information, and they're going to come and pin me down and ask for taxes that I don't have. Yeah. So in terms of, in summary, we've got the subject, data subject rights. You need to be conscious about that. So all the smart government automation solutions that you develop ensure that you have aligned to the data subject rights. You're able to inform the subject owner, the data subject owner about their rights. Yeah, there's a breach notification within 72 hours. Again, that has to be there. You've seen, for example, Naivas they've actually been fined because of not complying with that notification. Then there's privacy by design. Yeah, then increased territorial scope in terms of sovereignty. And one of the key areas in government is smart healthcare. Yeah, the issue of data for health has to sit within the boundaries of the country. So you have to ensure that you are conscious about your storage. Is it on cloud? Is it on-prem? If you're a hybrid system, have you declared what's being run on hybrid, what's being run on premise? What kind of processing are you using? What kind of algorithms are you using to process that data? And how is that information going to impact the patient, for example? Yeah, so all those are very much specified. And then penalties for non-compliance, it's good to know. I've not come across where any government entity is being penalized, but so far, yeah. But I think there's a mechanism of dealing with that within the government. But for purposes of understanding this law and its impact on smart government, it's supposed to enable the quicker implementation and adoption of those technologies. So what's the importance of this? It's going to bring about innovation, yeah? So we are going to have that barrier to innovation removed because of the fear of litigation. So people are coming in to say, because I know X amount of information, I can process the data and I can be able to foretell or forecast there's going to be this shortage. So that information can be misused if it's, for example, someone who knows that there's going to be a shortage of onions, they can start hoarding onions, yeah, and for sale at a certain time. So that's not the kind of innovation we're talking about. We're talking about innovation for social good, innovation that's going to bring about and remove the unfairness and equitable distribution of resources amongst the citizens. Then there's also another advantage, which is consequences of non-compliance, which is fines. You need to be pretty much aware about that. Yeah, so even you as a professional managing that data ecosystem, there's also a responsibility that you have as an individual, not just the organization only. Then there are legal actions, and then lastly, damage to reputations. These damage to reputations taints the name of the organization that's running that application. So it's important to see that that compliance is there so that you avoid instances where you are dragged into mud or appearing in a lot of committees to review the use of the data that the ecosystem was utilizing. Yeah, so some of the best practices as we wind up is ensure that you have this position of data protection officer. Wherever you're running any data project, always ensure that there's that. Conducting of regular data protection training for the employees. Yeah, so within the government, I'm aware there's the Office of Data Protection partnership with the Kenya School of Government. So these trainings are available for your officers to run through them, and they also get certified. Yeah, so there's no excuse for ignorance because the training is there and it's been rolled out already. They're providing clear and concise privacy notices to data subjects. That's very important. Like you've seen what is happening with the clubs now. So as you do go about your implementation and rolling out, ensure even if it's a farmer you're going to collect the data from, you're telling the farmer this and this is going to happen. If it's a health center that you're collecting information from, or any other engagement you have with the citizens of your within your jurisdiction, ensure that there's that communicated. Then implementing subject rights mechanism. Yeah. And then lastly, implementing technical and organizational measures to protect personal data. So that means upscaling, and that's why we have those vendors within here who can pretty much take you through the various available options, whether you're doing storage of your data on cloud, on premise, what are the best governance structures to ensure that you have that. If you're using a mobile app, how do you protect yourself from infringement or leakages of data from those systems? Yeah, so these challenges actually are there, and you might have experienced some of them. So these are just 4 that I repetitively come across. So limited resources for compliance, which means you don't have someone to point out to you what is right, what is wrong. Yeah, so lack of awareness, understanding of the law. So this can be mitigated by those training that I mentioned, but still there's still lack of awareness, in the common market. Then limited guidance from the Data Protection Commissioner, of course, being still a lean office compared to what mandate is bestowed to them. So some of us are coming in to support in that evangelizing the Data Protection Act, and seeing that people are more open to utilizing those resources that the Data Protection Commissioner has. Yeah, and forums such as this, where we find an opportunity to relay part of those elements communicated in the Act. And then lastly, difficulty in obtaining consent from data subjects. And we've seen already, so someone who owns a club and goes and puts a blanket notice that the moment you walk here, like this hotel, they'll say the moment you've walked into this room, your photo will appear anywhere. Yeah, it's because of getting that consent is not easy. You have to sit, and each one of you has to sign, that consent that the moment you're sitting here, your photo will appear. So that difficulty of obtaining consent comes with various levels of knowledge for the data subjects. So if you're dealing with citizens, there are different levels. Literacy levels are different. Yeah, we have M-Pesa, thank God, but do we even know what M-Pesa really, the information that M-Pesa produces, where it's used? Yeah, so that's the kind of challenge that's displayed. Yeah, so then lastly is ensuring compliance with data protection. So 4 things you need to bear in mind. 1, is you need to conduct a deep PIA, data protection impact assessment. That has to be conducted on annual basis. So a report has to be submitted, and some of this is going to be required for you to access certain services. Yeah. So developing, implementing a data protection policy, that should come first for your own department, organization, that needs to be in place. Ensuring cross-border transfer of data are lawful, so especially for those sensitive departments like finance data and health data. The other regulators, such as the central bank, regulates that data here. And then the Ministry of Health and ICT information about health data. Yeah, it's regulated. Like you saw during the WorldCoin, data about our iris scans. Implementing data protection by design and default also is another area that you need to implement. So responding to data requests in timely and a more efficient manner. Yeah. So in summary, 3 things. 1, legal and compliance. So ensuring that you've set up measures to have the compliance with the set regulations. 2, data. All the data that you're collecting has to have that guide. What type of data is it? How we're using to process it? How long you're going to stay with it? That declaration has to come up front. Then also this data subject, right, has to be aware of the data that you're using. Even there's what you call data, first primary data, secondary data, and tertiary data. So you have to declare across all the spectrums. If you're going to process that data with an algorithm to get certain outcome, again, that has to come out. So not just declaring the primary data, but not being clear of what impact of that data is on a particular algorithm that's exposed to, such as what is the impact of location where you're staying to the credit score. You have to say and declare that to the consumer, to the contributor of that data. And then the technology also you're using, this has to come out clearly. So in terms of where you collect on, you're using an app. Those apps, are they granted permission to access the user's phone book, the user's voice messages, the user's photos, and then where are you storing the data? So is it on cloud, on premise, and then also how are you relaying that data between entities? Yeah. All right. So I think I'm going to stop there and open the floor for the other panelists. So I'll give them an opportunity to introduce themselves, and then they can give us their thoughts on this subject. And then after doing the first round, we can open the floor for questions. Then we'll come back and give you the feedback to those questions. So please go ahead.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you very much. My name is Paul Njuguna. I'm a consultancy in governance, risk and compliance space, also in cybersecurity and Data Protection Act compliance and walkthrough. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Good afternoon, audience. My name is Evans Ikua. I'm from Learned Consulting Group, where we give solutions around information security and privacy. We do training around data protection, and we train data protection officers. I've also authored a book on this topic of data protection and how to gain compliance. So maybe as we do the introductions, I'll be able to give a few remarks about the topic. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bonke. I am the CTO for Cisco Systems. I'll be handling the discussion around e-government and digital economy. So I joined the panelists a bit early. I'll give a few thoughts around this topic when my time comes. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so now that you have the mic, could you just start with your thoughts around the subject of data privacy and smart governments?
Okay, thank you. So my area of expertise is not really around data privacy, but the thing that I would like to mention around that is there's concerted effort from most of these technology companies, one of them being the one I work for, towards making sure that we are compliant with the local data privacy laws, but also with the regional and, of course, the global ones. Having said that, most of the work that goes into this digital government, smart cities, and all that must have at the center or at the heart of it data privacy considerations taken into place. The reason for that is because when we make efforts towards one of the slides that was presented showed the 3 key components that are required to make a smart city possible is when you make concerted efforts towards securing the users on the cyber side of things, there is also that level around the data privacy that needs to be taken into consideration. And the simple reason for that is so that there is this confidence that we are building among the population that everything that they do is basically going to not affect them in a negative way. So my few comments around that topic would be that. But I'll speak more and bring the two worlds around data privacy and e-government when my time comes. Thank you very much.
Okay. Yes, please. You can pick up on those thoughts, Evans. Go ahead.
I hope this mic is audible.
Not yet.
Has it come online? I'll try and use this one. I think it's going to be better. So I'll want to pick up from where my colleague finished. And when we talk about smart government and the fourth industrial revolution and everything, what we are seeing, and it's very clear even in this presentation, what we can see is a growing collection of sensors and networks that are interconnected and that are collecting data from all over and analyzing that data and give us information that helps us to do what we need to do, as individuals. And as we do that, it is imperative that at the end of the day, data is going to be collected, and that data is going to be personal data. So, for instance, if maybe you took an Uber here, it means that Uber knows where you are, and Uber probably knows where you live. If you have your Google location turned on, the company called Google knows exactly where you are. And in as much as we don't pay for all these services and a lot of other social media services that we use, we are always reminded that if you're not paying for something, then you are the product. And the business model for all those companies, besides the other uses of data that we know, like in government and in hotels like this and all that, a lot of those companies, their business model is normally data. Personal data, that is basically what they sell to their advertisers. So, and that is where the Data Protection Act comes in. That is where the GDPR comes in. That is where all these laws that we have across the world come in to help protect the privacy of people. So that when somebody collects your data, in as much as an individual, you might not know what you can be able to do to that organization in case they breach your privacy. There is a law that protects you, and you can rest assured that the law can kick in case they do the wrong thing. Now, we've seen a lot of discussion about the law. Now it is a fact that we have the law. We can already see penalties being issued and enforcement actions. But the biggest issue is the how to comply, how to ensure compliance, so that in case something should happen in your organization, you are able to show that you have complied to the law, or you're able to give assurance to either yourself or the stakeholders that you have. These might be your clients, these might be your business partners, these might be the regulatory authorities such as the data commissioner. So how do you ensure compliance? And to sum up what my colleague mentioned, the way to assure compliance, I support organizations in the journey towards compliance. And many times when an organization calls us, what they normally tell us is, we want you to come and help us to create a privacy policy or a data protection policy. And they normally think that that is the end. But the story does not end with creating a policy. What we normally need as an organization to ensure compliance is to create a program for compliance. We can call it a privacy program. And this is just, it's a program just like you'd have an information security program. Many times we know organizations will implement information security management systems. Those in government know about the performance contracting that requires you to implement information security management systems, which many times are normally based on ISO 27001. So for privacy, it's the same thing. You can implement a privacy program, call it whatever you like, but that program is going to be made up of all those issues that my colleague have talked about. They are going to be the policies and the notices and the procedures and the processes that you put in place. It's going to be the automation that you have, the training and awareness that you give to your employees and everybody that you deal with. All that is going to be part of your privacy program. Now, my perspective, because we do a lot of training around ISO standards, my perspective is the perspective of being able to demonstrate compliance. When the Data Protection Act was enacted in 2019, one of the leading telcos, which has already implemented an information security management based on ISO 27001, released an RFP for an ISO standard to allow them to conform to privacy. There is another standard that normally is used for that, ISO 27701. And this basically comes from the perspective of them being able to demonstrate compliance, either to the data commissioner or to the business partners that they deal with. That's the kind of organization, if they want to do business with you, or if you want to do business with them, they'll normally give you a raft of requirements, wanting to know whether you have complied to certain regulations. Data protection is just one of them, and many, many other regulations. So how does an organization demonstrate that they have complied? One of the ways that they can be able to do that, and the most easy way to do that, is to implement a privacy program based on an ISO standard. In this case, it's the ISO 27701, which is normally built on ISO 27001. Now, the law does not require you to implement an ISO standard, and it does not care whether you implement an ISO standard or not. But the ISO standard helps you, guides you from the perspective of best practices and from the perspective of coherence in how you are going to be able to implement and how you are going to be able to show, to demonstrate compliance. If you go to the GDPR, it specifically mentions ISO 27001 and recognizes the importance that that standard gives to organizations that are starting on a journey towards compliance to GDPR. And because we know that the Data Protection Act of Kenya, in Kenya, is, and as many, many other data protection laws around the world, they are mainly based on, or kind of based on the GDPR. Now, where the Data Protection Act does not mention the ISO standard, in section 74, at the very tail end of the act, talks about gives the data commissioner the leeway to create standards for conformity. Gives the data commissioner the leeway to create marks marks and symbols that can be used by organizations. Of course, after they have been audited, to be able to show that those organizations have complied to the act. The importance of that is if any other stakeholder, maybe another business partner or another organization that probably intends to share data with the organization, they will have a point of reference to know whether you have protected your data appropriately or not. Even for internal stakeholders. For instance, if the top management of an organization wants to find out whether the people who are responsible for implementing privacy have implemented privacy appropriately in compliance, the easiest way for them to do that is to basically base that discussion on a framework, whichever framework that can be adopted. And one of those frameworks that is best and used globally is basically the ISO standards. So ISO standards will have those two perspectives. They'll help you to demonstrate compliance, and they'll also help you to have an assurance for yourself that you have done exactly what you need to do, and you have followed the best practices that are adopted globally to have a privacy program that can help you to protect the data of the data subjects that you are going to be collecting. I'm sure my colleague here, Paul, is going to be able to build on that and add something on that discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul?
Thank you. My story is going to revolve around what are the trenches. What are we finding? What are we seeing people doing? What is becoming difficult to achieve? And it's very interesting because in the recent months, there's been a lot of awareness at the grassroots. ODPC office has been really embarking on that. But there is a very, very high level of ignorance also. The recent thing that has been trending of notice of non-compliance has created an illusion that you can relate data privacy with the notices you put at the car park. If your car is broken and stolen, you are not liable, or what. Unfortunately, the Data Protection Act, which gets its power from Section 31C and B, Article 31C and B, clearly states you have all the rights as a human and a citizen sovereignty. Now, general regulations and the Act are very clear about explicit consent. But just reading a notice at the entrance is not good enough. There has to be explicit, note the word explicit consent, not implied consent. So, unfortunately, that is tied up with ignorance, but as we go by, you'll see a lot of changes, and people are getting to know. Now, the beauty of this, so many people have woken up, and they want to do something. We've contacted people as far back as March. The last 4 days, our phones are very busy. What is this you are telling us some months ago? Tell us more. You see, so at least that has woken people up. So what do we find in the field? I'll start from the entrance. Institutions have CCTVs. They don't notify you. Remember, your image is data. I have to be told this place is under CCTV surveillance. So when I walk in, I'm aware. Now, just to reiterate what he mentioned, we have challenges because I am able to come as per the Act and tell you, please forget about me. You took my CCTV, forget about me. Still, people are thinking through, what do we have to do about these cases? People have done that, honestly. And let me give you a case study. One of my clients called me a while back. The DCIO office had come and they wanted the footage because they wanted to see some people who are having conversation in a restaurant. And the Act talks about exemptions. So the office of the CID is an exemption. But then when they remember what we trained them on, they called. What do we do? I told them, remember sovereignty of the data subject. You're going to give images of somebody and he or she is not aware. Get a court order. Tell those people to get a court order. And they were told to get a court order. Guess what? They never came back. It's as deep as that. So we find all that happening. There's also the issue of, before the Act, I had so much data, which is helping me to run the business. What do I do? Because I need it, I can't survive. The Act And the general regulations provide you to do what we'll call synonymization of data. You can still keep the data, but make sure it doesn't reflect on Paul. I am turned into an ABCD, but all the data, the pattern, and the history is there about whatever. So that's another issue that is in the trenches, and people are getting to do it. There is technology. You also need to talk to service providers. It's there. The other issue comes to employee, HR. It's a very big challenge. You find some employers, they have this standard employment contract, and they talk about you signing, they'll use your image in their collaterals, etc., as part of the employment letter. Remember, that is not explicit consent. It has to be separated. Many of us would not want to lose a job because we never signed a letter. That has to be separated, and it becomes explicit consent. They are doing that, and they are changing. So you sign your employment letter, even if it's there, later on, if there is marketing, collateral, something comes, and I have agreed. And remember, if I agree, you have to give me an avenue to say, enough, I want to be out. You get? So there has to be that opt-out option all the time. I'm opting in, I have to see something following me. Now it's time. I don't need to be in this or that. So those are the kind of education we are giving. Talk of CVs, all HR people are receiving CVs, and remember what is in CV. It's huge information, very private, sensitive information. If you are a HR person, you know you've been given and trusted with that CV, you can't start sending it to your colleagues because they're also looking for people to employ in the name of helping. You have to come up with mechanism of how do you communicate with your prospective employees in regards to CV. A big challenge also with many companies, what do you do with the data of employees who have left? This is a catch-22. To be honest, there's a generation that if you go to NSSF, they can't be paid, they are told go to your employer and bring us proof that this was paid. So it's unfortunate for such case. Again, the employer doesn't want to keep the data forever. There has to be a purpose limitation. So those are the things that, as he mentioned, the commissioner has to come up and actually do some guidance. There are some gaps and all that. There are quite a number of issues we are finding out there, and we'll be happy to discuss as we continue with this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. So I wanted just to open the floor for any direct questions to any of the panelists or contributions to this subject. So we could have.
Hey, so I also wanted to engage you, Bonke. So in April, the World Bank approved of 390 million in financing for the first phase of the Kenya Digital Economy Acceleration Project. So this happens in 2 phases, 2023 to 2028, which focuses on expanding access to high-speed internet, improving the quality and delivery of education and selected government services, and building skills. In phase 2, 2026 to 2030, concentrating on building a data-driven and secure environment for enhanced digital service delivery and innovation. So I'm just thinking, how timely is this project and how practical is it? And if it comes to pass, how will the average Kenyan like me benefit from it? Yeah.
Thank you, Carol. So, speaking through the question that you've put to me, we all know that the current government came into power on the premises around digital government, and at the heart of any digitization effort is usually connectivity, which basically forms the pillar or the foundation of any digitization or digitalization effort. For the last few years, we've had this effort by the previous government trying to sort of increase penetration, internet penetration across the country, but there are certain areas that have not been covered as of today, which is why one of the key elements of the beta plan that the government has is what we call the National Superhighway, which is basically an additional 100,000 kilometers of fiber connectivity, which is meant to serve all the 47 counties in the country, all the way up to 1450 wards across the country. Now, the reason why World Bank, IMF came on board is because in order for us as a country to be able to get to that very ambitious plan, then the financing element comes into play. But more importantly, because of the agenda that is there of how we are going to utilize that connectivity. So for the first part of the question, it is integral for any government, not only the Kenyan one, even across the region, that's what's happening, to increase internet connectivity penetration. And the only way to do it is by, of course, taking this initiative all the way to the grassroots. Secondly, digital government basically means services from government that are run on the cyberspace. And we all know that nothing can work in the cyberspace minus the internet. So we've also seen one of the agenda that the government has had is to transfer government services from paper, from manual to digital, right? As of this week, when we were with the CS for ICT, I'm meant to understand that we have more than 10,000 services already digitized, with another 6,000 coming up or partially digitized. So in order for us to be able to achieve that, then connectivity is at the heart of it and forms the foundation for it. Another key aspect that started around 2016 with the introduction of CBC, competency-based curriculum, is this effort towards digital learning. We all know that the government, the previous government, made some effort towards, issuing laptops to the students. Of course, there were some challenges with that project, but the idea behind it was that because one of the key elements of CBC is to incorporate or to actually use technology to disseminate learning and to make the teaching experience more useful to the teacher so that they can concentrate on teaching and leave the learners to learn, is basically to move towards digital learning. So in order for us to be able to achieve that, we have to have connectivity in all the schools across the country, which basically cover all the 1,450 wards across the country, and is covered, of course, by the National Superhighway Initiative. So in summary, this effort is basically meant to address a few of those pillars that make digital government possible. But the most important thing is that it made sense to the partners of the government to fund it because of one issue that was spoken about, which is basically preparation for the fourth industrial revolution and equity and equitability for all across the country. Those would be my thoughts around that.
Okay.
Thank you. The floor is open for questions.
There was a hand there.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for a great presentation. I hope you can hear me. I think mine was just a reaction and a comment. Obviously, I think and by the way, on top of what I do, I am actually a practicing privacy practitioner by IAPP. And I like some of the comments you made, but one of the things I just wanted to highlight, especially for the Office of Data Protection, is there's always a thin line between, privacy and, of course, data protection. And I think it's important, especially as we're in this conversation around open government and the use and the importance of data, around us being very clear in our sensitization to the public and even to ourselves about the kind of data that really needs to have the highest level of protection. And that is, of course, personal data. I love the point you talked about in terms of pseudonymization of data, etc., because there's data that can be very useful for us today. If you think about even how we plan our hospitals, how we plan our infrastructure, a lot of that sometimes is missing some of these components, right? So we need to be careful that we don't get to a point where we claw back ourselves, because of privacy, right? And yet we have a good opportunity as this country to leap forward from where others have been. So I think the point that was mentioned around, can we have the right technology that allows us to pseudonymize data, to make sure that our government systems, as an example, can speak to each other, right? Today we were saying, if you look at as an individual, you put your data on eCitizen, but again, if you go to NTSA, the data, they're not speaking to each other. We need to find a way where we are stopping those silos, and I think that's the bigger opportunity. I think the use of technology is there, especially from a compliance perspective. As you spoke, I'm sure people were asking themselves, how do I go about making sure that I protect and I don't find myself, with a fine from the data protection. So I think we need to have more sessions of sensitization, especially around the use of technology to help you at the back end. And that's what can also help the CIOs who are in this room to get their job done better, because there's no bigger consumer of data than government. But I think the quickest win is really around using technology very quickly that will help us to make sure we safeguard the data, but at the same time, we democratize the data to make citizen services more accessible, and of course, we can innovate using a lot of the data that's publicly available. Thank you.
Yes, please. Go.
If I may react to that, it's a very, very important point, because in all this discussion about data protection, people have kind of gotten the narrative of we need to hide our data should not be processed, or organizations or companies will be going around wondering, should we really process people's data if there are all these fines and all that? But there is a guy, many of us would know him, called Edward Snowden. He once said that privacy is not about something to hide, but about something to protect. So it is imperative that as we go through our lives, our data is going to be processed in one way or another. It is impossible for us to utilize the opportunities that we have in technology without our data being processed. If you go to the bank, they have to process your data so that they can be able to know what your bank balances are and what your transactions are like. You go to the hospital, the same thing. They have to process your data so that they can be able to make the treatment process better and more effective. And at some point, that data is going to need to be exchanged between organizations. So it is not a matter of data should not be processed or data should not be shared among organizations, but it's a matter of ensuring that that data is protected. And there are certain rules that are put in place to ensure that that happens in a regulated manner, so that somebody will not just take your data. For instance, if you come here and you register at the reception and you put your ID number, your phone number, and all that, the regulation is to make sure that that person only uses that information for the purpose that they collected it for. They do not take that book and go to sell it to somebody who's going to start calling you to sell you loans or something like that. So it's not a matter of data should not be processed. It's a matter of it must be processed in a certain environment and certain rules must be followed so that the data subject is not affected inappropriately. So
why should I care about data if I'm poor and I don't have food to eat? Yeah. Why should I care about data privacy? I mean, if WorldCoin are giving me 7,000 shillings and I can buy food that day, and I don't know what my data means to me, should I still be held responsible for my data?
Okay, if that is what you said, it's very interesting because privacy can have, one of the things about privacy, and you'll understand the Data Protection Act gets its power from the Constitution, and the Constitution has a Bill of Rights. It gives certain rights. One of them, of course, is to, right to privacy. And that is where the Data Protection Act comes in. Now, I mentioned the processing that happens in hospitals and the processing that happens in financial institutions. If, for instance, your personal data, if you go to a hospital and they treat you for a certain disease, whatever disease they may treat you for, and they give that information to the general public, they simply publish it on the website, that in the past 1 month, so-and-so has come to a hospital and we treated them for this and this disease. And, and they list all the people, how they come and how they treat them. Of course, we know there is loss of confidentiality, isn't it? And the impact of that can be much, much bigger than you going to bed hungry. So the impact around the privacy and the loss of privacy in certain instances can be very, very huge. And that is why when we look at, and one of the things that is required in the Data Protection Act is the risk assessment. We know about the Data Protection Impact Assessment and the risk assessment. The main focus on that is impact. What would be the impact of a data breach happening, or the loss of confidentiality or integrity happening to the owner of the data? And that is very, very, very important, and an important thing that everybody needs to consider. It's not just a matter of the privacy of somebody not knowing that I'm in this location right now, but there are many, many other big impacts that can have very, very big effects on people if the loss of confidentiality is there, or the loss of integrity.
Yes, go
ahead. Okay. Let me comment something on what is just mentioned about data privacy impact assessment. I'll take you back in history. Most of you are aware we had this Huduma number exercise. Brilliant idea. We identified we'll be able to deal with the government and all that. But it failed on one test. It did not explain what are the likelihood this data can go to the wrong hands and what would happen. The fact that that exercise missed the data privacy impact assessment was good enough to put the sovereignty of a data subject over any intended system. That's why the court threw it out, regardless of how much money was spent. It's that critical when it comes to Article 31, B and C. Thank you.
Okay, I had a question, a clarification. I'm seeking a clarification. You have talked about CCTV cameras and what should happen. Can you just re-clarify that? Because if you look nationally and actually globally, people have installed those surveillance camera right from our offices to our homes to our gates. And everywhere you go, CCTV cameras are there. People can be able to monitor their houses or their compound. Even when you are seated here or in US, you can see what is happening in your house. What you've explained, I think, has left me more confused than sorted out, because then it looks like everything we've done will be reduced, if we don't act very fast, can be reduced to nothing by people who have malicious intentions. Secondly, this has come at a time when already a lot of integrations had happened, such that when I do my transactions, say, on the system for Kentrade, I look up the data for your PIN or your personal data from other institutions. I don't have to rekey your data afresh. We have that kind of a protocol agreement. So where does that leave us? Do we have to go backward now, telling the millions of clients who are using such systems, telling them to consent, or do they consent as we go forward, as they log in, or how should that be handled? Because I'm seeing like this data protection, it is good, yes, but then it will introduce a lot of complications along the way. And of course, the guys who will be left there as winners are the lawyers, because they can as well take a lot of advantage of this. And every small thing is rushed to court, and somebody is told to pay. Before you realize where you are paying, you've already paid. There's no much sensitization that has been done, especially to the common mwananchi. And I think a lot need to be done going forward to just sensitize all of us, especially the data subjects who are very many out there, not necessarily the people in this room. There need to be a lot of sensitizations happening throughout.